I just welcomed everyone to another NARDAC Forum. Here's the chair, Clara Liao.
Thank you, Jamie. Dear
Sure.
participants, welcome to NARDAC 2023 November Forum. I'm Clara, Liao, NARDAC Chair. We are glad to see many colleagues registered, and we are looking forward to communicating with you in the Q&A session. Please use the Q&A board to post your questions. Here is today's agenda. The first part is all about RSC working groups. We have representatives from all current RSC working groups, and they will present their work, including the issues and the challenges that they are facing and trying to resolve. Then RSC Chair Renate Behrens will give a comprehensive introduction of RSC working group. It will help us to understand why and how RSC working groups are formed. There will be a Q&A session after her presentation for all questions relating to RSC working groups. Please note, we have representatives from all over the world, including some places far away like Germany, Israel, Switzerland, United Kingdom. So we arrange the topics in this order so that some representatives can finish their presentations early and can get a good rest. Then after the RSC working groups, our next session, Hong from Library and Archives Canada will bring us updates about their bilingual RDA policy statements development. Today's last session is NARDAC update. Without further ado, now I hand it over to Esther to give us update about the place and then jurisdiction working group.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay? Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I greet you from Germany. It is late in the evening, and this is the team of our little working group. There are only 5 members, and 1 person is from Israel, 3 are from the USA, and me, I'm from Germany. And we got a task. We can show the next slide. We got a task in December 2021, and there was the problem, or the task was to clarify the semantics of places and jurisdiction. And this is based on the minutes of the RSC meeting in Montreal from 2018. And then we got the terms of reference. And on the next slide, here on the second point, there is our task described. We have to review the elements and instructions related to place and jurisdiction in both the original toolkit and official toolkit, and evaluate the intended cataloging outcomes for each. It was a rather technical working group. We had to examine a lot of papers, and we were organized via video calls. We did 11 video calls. We can go to the next slide. And we worked also in a Confluence wiki of the German National Library. I'm from the German National Library. We report to the RSC, and we did 2 proposals on this website. You can find the proposals. And now I come to the first proposal. The first proposal was delivered in April of this year. And the first 3 recommendations were accepted by the RSC in May 23. And the first recommendation was revise element definitions and instructions across RDA to clarify the distinction between a jurisdiction and a government. The proposal was based on the recommendations of a paper of the technical working group. That was one of the documents we had to examine or to investigate. And this proposal or this paper from the technical working group were from 2014, and we analyzed it, and then we did this first recommendation, revise element divisions and instructions, and that is the slide before. We identified 10 different passages where this definitions and instructions had to be clarified, and this was done in the proposal. And then the second recommendation was to propose a glossary term and definition of the concept court. And the third recommendation was revise the element name for work and acting jurisdiction to and acting government and corporate body and acting jurisdiction to an acting government of. These 3 recommendations were accepted, and the following 4 recommendations were not accepted. And because they were not accepted, we had to find a new solution, and therefore we did a second proposal. That is the next slide. And this second proposal was delivered on July 31st, and this second proposal consists of 3 recommendations, and these 3 recommendations were revise the labels for corporate body, revise the definitions of corporate body, and revise the definitions of current place. All these recommendations were approved in October, and I think our work is now finished. That is what I think. But probably RSC will give us a new task and say, please check some passages in the RDR toolkit or whatever they think we should do. But this working group was to clarify semantics concerning the term jurisdiction. Yeah, thank you for your attention. And that is my email address if you want to write to me or to ask questions. And more infos you can get from this RC website.
Thank you, Esther, for the update. Let's move on to our next working group, official languages working group. Hand it over to you, Hanoch.
Thank you. Apologies in advance for having a much more laconic explanation of our working group. I did not go into a very extended description of our recommendations, but I will show the main topics. So if you could go to the next slide. So our members were located in many places. Our chair, Peter Rolla from the United States, Daniel Paradis that came, he initiated, I think, our work group. He requested this to check the official languages. Hannes from Belgium, me from Israel, and Valentina from the Swiss National Library. We tried to look at as many languages as we could find to see the needs of each language. I am an Asian languages librarian, so I tried to give a perspective also from the languages I deal with, to try and put as many of the practices under the umbrella of RDA, even for cataloging languages that currently are outside RDA because of RDA not supporting their needs. Apologies, I was disconnected for a second. The purpose of our working group was to examine the official language, the concept official language, and see if it is useful and how useful it is under the new RDA. So we can go to the next one. So these are the sections that we had recommendations for, which deal with the corporate body, its preferred name, preferred access point for corporate bodies that are governments, and places. So we can move to the next one. So the main problems are, at least for corporate bodies that are not governmental, determining the official language is not so easy. You need to go to the charter of the corporate body and check there what the official language is. The conditions that were in RDA were pretty complex. They were not flexible. It was prescriptive. If you have this condition, choose this. And if you have a different condition, choose something else. And there was not very much support for what some cataloging agents chose to use. And we noticed that there were some inconsistencies. For example, choosing an access point preferred by the agent were available if there was a single language for the corporate body, but not if it has two languages. So there were some inconsistencies that we wanted to resolve. So if we could move to the next one. So the main things that we try to do is simplify the instructions. We try to add an option to have the record to record the value based on the preferred language of the agent, to have support for institutions that are, for example, unilingual, monolingual, and prefer to have the access points in their own language, even if the language of the institution is not that language. I wanted to note the use of the indefinite article. It is not by mistake or by chance, but it is intentional. We use record the language in a value or in a language of a corporate body. This is intended to allow use for institutions that use more than a single language, and they can choose the preferred value for each of the languages it uses in its cataloging. And we did not use the term application profiles, but at least for the corporate bodies that are not governmental, we did suggest using more condition options and less of the prescriptive form of the RDA that was, if it's A, B, C, then choose the first option. And if the condition is different, choose the other option. We opted to use an option when, for example, you have a corporate body that uses multiple languages, then you have the option to do A, to do B, to do C on your based on your preference, and it is in essence an application profile that each cataloging agent would have to decide for themselves what strategy to use in their under their jurisdiction, let's say. Some things that I wanted to note in addition is that for governments, we did use the official language. The term is still used in the corporate body, but is has less weight to it. You don't have to use the official language. For governments, it was decided to keep the term official language because it is much easier to discern. But it's something that can be used. For locations, we opted to still use official language of the government or the body that has jurisdiction, but I did advise our working group to stay clear of determining what language you should use for a location, because there are many disputed territories, and I think it would be better to not go into it. If, for example, you want Jerusalem or Al-Quds or Yerushalayim, I think it is better left for each cataloging agency to choose their own form and not prescribe what form one should use. If we can move to the last slide. This is something that was not under our charge, but we do think that it needs to be discussed in later working groups. Or the first thing is that when there is a difference between script and language, but some languages do use other scripts, and there is the principle of representation that, for example, in NACO is used, and sometimes it misses the mark. For example, the transliteration of Hebrew is not very useful and is very confusing. In Israel, we decided to prefer the English names of corporate bodies that use English over the transliteration of Hebrew, which is very difficult to use even for Hebrew Hebrew speakers. Creating the transliteration is very complex. And so it's something that needs to be checked at a later date, maybe by a different group. And another thing is the same principle for names of persons. Sometimes the transliteration is given precedence over the name that the author chooses for himself in English. So this is something that maybe should be checked. And we did receive a request in the previous RSC meeting about Oceania, about something that is names that are use two languages, but as far as I understand, we do not need to get into it. They will discuss this in a different forum. So this is what I had, and I will gladly answer questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's move to the next working group, extent working group. Hand it over to you, Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you all for attending. And you can all hear me? Yes.
Yes.
So this is a brief update on another RSC working group, the extent working group. The purpose of this, just a moment. The purpose of this working group is to support the improvement of those RDA elements that use measurements of some kind. So the most common instructions for measurement catalogers encounter now are with recording the extent of manifestation with units and subunits, also with recording dimensions. But we also have instructions that deal with other aspects, such as counting the particular types of content, the number of images and maps. So what the working group was focused on was the different ways of measuring and counting aspects of the resources we are describing, with the particular challenge of how best to distinguish and organize those aspects. So this is the extent working group, the members here. We've had a 2-year term, and we have representation from multiple regions and specializations. Next slide. And these are the elements in the official toolkit that are our starting point. There are expression elements for extent, as well as representative expression elements. And the largest set of instructions, as I indicated, are for extent of manifestation and for the elements for dimensions. Next slide. So among the issues the extent working group has had to contend with is the question of how to handle the aspect unit quantity, or AUQ model, that came from earlier efforts to establish machine actionable data elements for extent. Coming up next after me is Gordon Dunsire, who will go into detail about new potential elements that are organized around the distinct aspects that were identified by the extent working group. The AUQ, or aspect unit quantity model, those efforts preceded the results of the 3R project. And so now, because of all the new things that are in the official toolkit, there are more tools that are disposal to handle how we can record data about extent. So for example, manifestation statement elements are new. And so a manifestation statement element for extent is now possible. In particular, we can describe statements on the resource exactly as to how it represents information about measurements or counts. With new possible elements for extent, there's also the question of displaying that information. And so new string encoding schemes can be developed with specific conventions moved over to community decisions for how to display this information. String encoding schemes to assemble elements for display is now part of community resources in the official toolkit. The working group also looked at other topics, such as cases where vocabulary terms needed to be developed or definitions that needed to be refined. There was also discussion about containers as they related to extent of manifestations. Now, a place where many of these ideas of extent are being explored is in the work of the International Standard Bibliographic Description, or ISBD, review groups. Specifically the Task Force for ISBD for Manifestation, which is charged with aligning the ISBD with the IFLA reference model, or LRM. And so now I'll pass on the presentation to Gordon Dunsire. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. So I'm going to talk a bit about the work we've been doing with ISBD and how it may inform the work of the RSD Extent Working Group. Next slide. So the ISBD for Manifestation project is to align ISBD with the IFLA library reference model. But an important additional constraint on the project is to retain, if not improve, the existing interoperability between ISBD and RDA. Now, this is a huge job, and in order to make it tractable, the project is being carried out in 2 phases. The first phase looks only at the manifestation entity, because that's what ISBD currently covers in the main. And the second phase, if the first phase is successful, will go on to extend that work to cover the other LRM entities. Other constraints are that the review group wish to retain a level of prescriptiveness in ISBD, and because phase 2's not a given, the end of phase 1 should present a usable product in the form of a standalone ISBD for manifestation based on ideas of entity-based cataloging. The difference between this work and the 3R project and the work of the RDA Extent Group is that ISBD is not constrained by the review group's wish to remain backwards compatible. There are various reasons for this, but it has allowed ISBD to have a freer hand at looking at the modeling of extent, and some of these ideas, we hope, will be useful to RDA. The current draft of the ISBD for manifestation project, the product, is available at the URL that is on this screen. Next slide. As Thomas has mentioned, we've tried to retain the work carried out by ALA prior to the 3R project, which identified the aspect quantity units structure of measurable extent units, extent statements. The AQU works as shown on the screen here. The unit's a standard unit of measurement The quantity is an integer number. These are things that are being done by ISPD. And ISPD has identified 4 broad kinds or aspects of extent for manifestation. They're listed here: the extent of the unitary structure, the extent of the unit itself, the extent of embodied content, and the extent of aggregated content. And you will immediately see that there is a bridge or an overlap to expression level extent measurements, but this is in the context of manifestation. Next slide. So I'll go through each of these 4 aspects very quickly in turn. This presentation is available already on my website, where you can peruse it perhaps when you have more time. So extent of unitary structure is the number of subunits or parts of a manifestation that are in the same carrier type. In ISBD, a physical part of a manifestation is designated as subunit to distinguish it from whole part relationships that are inherited from work and expression structures. There are vocabularies for extent of unitary structure. The first one is the standard carrier type vocabulary, which is being adopted wholesale by ISBD. That's the RDA Onyx framework carrier type vocabulary. And there's a second vocabulary under development called extent of unitary structure. This has been a bugbear for a long time in RDA. It's the difference between still image and photograph. And the RDA extent working group has spent some considerable time discussing it. And as you know, some of these terms are in the existing carrier extent unit vocabulary. So here are some examples: 4 audio discs, 20 activity cards, and where there's more than one carrier type, the measurable units can be concatenated together, as in the last example. Next slide. If we look at extent of unit, this is the extent of the carrier itself. An individual unit, an individual component of the manifestation or a subunit. The extent of unit measurement necessarily includes parts of the unit that do not actually carry content. Again, this has been a problem that has obscured, I think, some of the things we tried to do in the past to measure extent. So the terms for extent unit are standard measurement units and specific terms related to carrier units. That's best explained with examples. So for a tape kind of carrier, the extent of unit is the length of tape which can potentially carry embodied content. For a volume, it is leaves. It's the number of sheets that are bound into a volume, some of which may be blank. So it includes blank tape, blank sheets, etc. Next slide. We also need to know how much content's embodied in the unit. How long is it going to take me to play this video? How long is it going to take me to read this volume? How heavy is it likely to be for me to carry home, etc. So extent of embodied content is a measurement of the actual amount of content that's embodied or carried by the manifestation. There is a vocabulary under development for this called layout of embodied content, and this refers to units of arrangement of content in a carrier. For example, a page, which is one side of a leaf that carries content. possibility of the size of a data file. Data, of course, is content, so the size of the file is the size of the embodied content. And a difficult one to wrap your head around, but the dimensions of a reproduced image. So you may have an original artwork that's been reproduced on a postcard, and it may be quite important to record the actual dimensions of the image, because that will give some information to the user of the clarity, etc., of that image. Next slide. The final broad aspect is extent of aggregated content. This is like extent of unitary structure. It's the number of, in this instance, content units or expressions of the same content type that are embedded in the manifestation. So the vocabularies for extent unit for aggregated content are, again, the RDA Onyx framework content type vocabulary and derived vocabulary from that. This is very symmetrical with the extent of unitary structure aspect. So that measures specific kinds of content, as I mentioned earlier, still images versus photographs. So we can have measurements like 4 texts, 10 for formed songs, 7 photographs, etc. Next slide. As Thomas showed at the beginning, there are a significant number of elements affected by extent, and both ISBD for manifestation and RDA rely on semantic hierarchies for much of the utility of the data. And with ISBD, we've been able to fit both old and new measurement elements into a new hierarchy under these 4 broad aspects of extent. So this is just an example. A traditional measurement such as bibliographic format is suddenly contextualized as being extent of unit, whereas the traditional playing time is seen to be a refinement of extent of embodied content. Next slide. Now, ISBD is using the idea of string encoding schemes, one of the new tools that Thomas mentioned, which allow us to bring together these 4 different aspects of extent to produce a broad single compound extent statement. So the ISBD string encoding scheme organizes the 4 aspects in a particular sequence, uses particular punctuation to separate out the individual values. And you can see at the bottom here examples of what this might look like to an end user. So a manifestation in multiple parts may be 3 volumes. You can see the total number of leaves in those 3 volumes and the extent of the expressions that are carried in those 3 volumes. Next slide. This is the final slide. We haven't mentioned pagination and foliation because that kind of falls out in the previous analysis. We first observed that pagination, etc., are manifestation statements, and existing cataloging rules often say to transcribe the last number in the sequence. However, as with all manifestation statements, that numbering may be missing, it may be incomplete or erroneous, or it may be downright misleading. So as Thomas mentioned, there's a possibility of a manifestation statement of extent. This has been added to ISBD for manifestation, which can be used to transcribe stated pagination. There are a number of issues associated with this. Very often, the word page doesn't appear in the actual statement itself. So it can look somewhat mystifying to an end user. But in ISBD testing this, we've discovered that there are quite a few other manifestation statements which mention extent. So examples are an audio book where it states on 12 cassettes. That's a manifestation statement of extent. It may state the total playing time on a CD, for example, and this again is a manifestation statement of extent. So pagination and foliation can be accommodated through a mix of using transcription from the manifestation and using measurement values in extent elements, as we've seen already, and building up a picture of the true pagination and foliation information in the manifestation by using a combination of elements and not trying to squeeze it all into a single statement. And I think that's me finished. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Gordon. Let's move on to last working group, religions in RDA working group. Hand it over to you, Patrick.
Hi, thanks. Yes, as Clara mentioned, I'll be presenting the work of the religions in RDA working group. If you could just move ahead to the next slide, please. So I just want to first start out, I apologize for not getting the institutional affiliation or the location, but like the other groups, this is definitely an international group, including our co-chair, David Roth, who is located in Israel, Kate James, Guido B. From Germany, and I believe the other members are located currently in the United States, but just preemptive apologies. But again, I'm just reflecting the work of this whole group, and it was definitely a team effort. So could you move on to the next slide, please? This group was charged with reviewing the official toolkit instructions for resources or agents related to religions. And this is quoting from the charge. We were charged with to move RDA toward unbiased and inclusive treatment of world religions. And within that, and sort of related in the charge, there's a specific goal of expanding the coverage of non-Christian religions in RDA. Can we move on to the next slide, please? The background of this, this working group emerged out of information that was presented at a 2019 RSC meeting. There's a working paper presented that identified a number of issues in the toolkit related to religion. Specifically, it was presented the 2019, sorry, I'm checking my notes, the 2019 RSC meeting prepared by Ahava Cohen. They list a number of very specific examples that I won't get into here because we haven't necessarily addressed them, but I just wanted to acknowledge that this definitely did not emerge out of a vacuum. So they identified that many of the rules give only Christian examples in the toolkit. There are many assumptions within the toolkit that assume the audience is working in the English language. And they also identified some potential issues for insufficient discussion related to like the discussion of different means of organization within religious communities. And all of those things we really took into account, and I'll get into it later when we get into some of our specific proposals, but one of the things that we kind of had to reckon with is the challenge of wanting to identify and eliminate bias in the toolkit, as well as the challenge of trying to create or maintain a list of things from other religions that would kind of necessarily always be incomplete. So I can understand people could have different approaches to how we handled it, but I think that was kind of a through line on how we handled a lot of our proposals. So could move on to the next slide, please. So our first proposal was specifically aimed at eliminating some specific options for access point of person. And I gave a couple of them here. And our goal with this really was, again, based around the idea that it was always going to be a challenge to try to accentuate this list with examples from other religions. And so really our goal in this proposal, and I would say in many of our proposals, was not to necessarily prevent any of the examples that are presented in the toolkit, but really to try to locate where those instructions best belong, whether that be in the base RDA itself or in a community resources example based on the specific religious community. Because there, and I think we get into some of the responses to the proposal, we'll talk about some of the other other approaches people may have taken or have been suggested, all of which I can totally understand, but that our goal for this first proposal was to eliminate some of these specific instructions as I list here, including ones for Pope or anti-Pope, Saint unless a person is Pope, Emperor, Empress, King or Queen, and Spirit. And in that proposal, we concluded that inclusion of titles for specific religions should be community-based and not part of base RDA. If you can move on to the next slide, please. So I just wanted to summarize in the slides. Hopefully these links will take you to the specific responses to each of these groups. And this isn't a list of all the responses, but I just wanted to capture them here just so people could see them. The North American RDA Committee did not support that first proposal and highlighted some of the things I mentioned earlier about, the relative value of just removing options versus including additional options to make it more accessible to other religions. And there was also some concern expressed in their response over singling out religious terms for removal as a potential example of bias in itself, which obviously would be something you'd want to avoid, since the whole purpose of this group is to try to eliminate that bias to begin with. The Oceania RDA Committee did approve, but also provided some additional suggestions, which we took into consideration and expressed a preference for retaining some of the information that we had suggested be removed to be included in the community resources. Next slide, please. The RDA examples editor did support the proposal. They noted some redundancy with some other instructions, and this gets into some of what comes next, which is I don't think this group's work is finished. It affects a lot of different areas, and this is one of the areas that these responses have been really useful in highlighting other areas where the suggestions we're making may affect other people. And then finally, the UK Committee on RDA supported our recommendation and also identified a term of rank or honor or office as having some of the similar issues as access point for person, which we'll get into later in the next proposal. So next slide, please. So this is just my own attempt to summarize some of the issues that were raised in all the responses, supportive and otherwise, starting with just the question of where should specific instructions, and I would add now examples, where should they be placed that would be most useful? How does deleting options from the toolkit, as we have proposed in some cases, affect cataloger workflows or other parts of the toolkit? And then finally, how do we balance the desire for specificity with concerns about bias and inclusivity? And I would not want to make it out like we've sort of solved or answered any of these questions definitively, but these are all things that we've definitely taken into consideration with our future proposals, and I think are just inherent to some of the work that our working group has done and a lot of the other working groups as well. Just that issue of where should these decisions be made. And I would say in general, we've come down on the idea that a lot of these decisions are more effectively made by particular cataloging communities rather than in base RDA. Next slide, please. So that brings us to our second proposal, which really consists of 3 recommendations. And I'll go through each of them in a little bit more detail, but this is just to summarize all 3 of them. The first is to revise the definition of term or rank or honor or office. The second is to remove specific instructions for popes and bishops, etc. And I'll go into what's included in that, etc. Later on, but moving those to the community resources for some of the reasons I've described before. And then finally, to revise the instructions for other persons of religious vocation to apply to terms of address without implication or rank. And again, I'll go into all 3 of these, but this is sort of the content of our second proposal touches on these 3 things. Next slide, please. So our first recommendation was to propose revising the definition of term or rank or honor or office. And I've reproduced here the full text as it appears and then included in strike-through text what we are proposing to remove. So as written, it currently reads a word or phrase indicative of royalty, nobility, ecclesiastical rank, or office, or a term of address for a person of religious vocation. And basically what we have proposed is removing the ecclesiastical qualifier and then basically subsuming that under the umbrella of a term of address for a person of religious vocation. And again, our thinking there was really to try to allow for some of these terms of ecclesiastical rank, which very often are terms of address as well, to be recorded, while also allowing for instances where religions have a term of address that does not necessarily come with the implication of rank. And that is, again, kind of an attempt to just make the standard more universal, and again, not try to prevent the examples that were described explicitly in the toolkit from being expressed, but really figure out how can we revise these definitions to make them more universal so that those examples can be included, but also ones that might be hard to find or hard to extend to other religions, to kind of allow for a little bit more flexibility, because what we were hoping to avoid really is is putting people in the position of questioning, is this term for another religion similar to, you know, bishop or pope or things like that, and really try to get at what's essential about the term, instead of listing more specific examples, which brings me to the next slide, please. So similarly, we proposed revising the definition, or sorry, looking at the wrong thing. Remove instructions for popes and bishops, etc., from the base RDA. We had identified these as legacies from AACR2. And again, we were suggesting not that these be removed from consideration, but just that they be located in the community resources rather than in the base RDA. If you could move on to the next slide, please. So this is just a continuation. These are some of the specific terms that were currently listed as explicit, where there was explicit instructions for how to record them. And it gets back to what we had said early on in the process of this group's work, which was that we felt like including a very comprehensive list that speaks to a lot of specific cases for a specific religion, even if it wasn't the intention, is sort of suggestive of potential bias just by virtue of how it might be difficult to apply those instructions, or people working in other religious contexts may not know exactly how to describe them. So these are some of the terms that we proposed moving out of base RDA and again moving them to community resources. They include anti-pope, archbishop other than cardinal, bishop other than cardinal, core bishop, cardinal bishop, cardinal priest, and cardinal deacon, and ecclesiastical prince of the Holy Roman Empire. And we felt that this list would certainly be useful for a cataloging community that is going to have come across these very often, but we thought it confused more than clarified to have them as part of the base RDA. And if you could move on to the next slide, please. And then finally, we proposed revising the instructions for other persons of religious vocation to basically, because as written, the instructions were including other persons of religious vocation as sort of anything that didn't fall into some of the more enumerated categories that I listed earlier. And so we had proposed changing the name to persons of religious vocation, and then include the option for cataloging communities to record a term of rank within this option. And again, it gets back to the idea of not wanting to prevent people terms of rank in a religious context, but allow for catalogers to record terms of address, whether or not they include terms of rank. And we proposed initially, and I'll get this to when we get to the responses to this proposal, we had initially basically suggested that these terms be recorded in either the language they were conferred, the language where the person resides, or in the language preferred by the creator of the metadata. And if you could go on to the next slide. Most of these second revisions were supported, but there were also lots of helpful revisions and suggestions by the other members of RSC as far as how these proposals might affect other areas. But then finally, I wanted to acknowledge that we had initially basically suggested those three methods of recording these terms as sort of all in one, and it was pointed out that it might be more helpful to allow for those three to be split into separate options, and then within those also allow for recording place terms that are also often relevant for terms of address for persons of religious vocation. But again, it's really just trying to get at what's important about these elements without necessarily leaning towards or being more explicit about some terms, which may make the toolkit less helpful for people cataloging in other contexts. Next slide, please. And so finally, I just wanted to summarize our work here and say removing these overly specific examples can make RDA more inclusive, but the work can't stop there, as the comments that we received from NARDAC and from some other people point out that it's not enough just to say we got to delete these and then it's over, and that deciding where specific instructions belong in this context was challenging for us. I won't. I speaking only for myself, I don't feel like I came away with it like with an absolute strong understanding or a strong feeling about where every single term should be. I just think as a group we often came down on the side of giving more flexibility to communities to define how they wanted to use these terms. And then I just wanted to again acknowledge how much the group appreciated the commentary by RSC members on our proposals. That I think they really improved the specific proposals, but also helped us in creating future proposals. And as this work continues, gave us a lot to consider when we make suggestions going forward. And I don't have a slide with my contact information, but I just wanted to say I'm happy to answer more specific questions. If you go to the next slide, please. Yeah, thanks. And again, hope these are linked, but this just provides links to our proposals in full, and then some of the summary and responses, decisions taken or responses to our proposals from some of the specific RSC groups, where you can get into some of the details and some of the commentary that were offered by each. So I think that does it for me. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone wants to reach out.
Thank you, Patrick. We're going to move on to the comprehensive information about RSC working groups. Hand it over to you, Renate.
Yes, thank you, Clara. And for me, just some brief background information about why we are doing this and what we are going ahead with these issues. If you can open the next slide, please. Yes, we are working in one of the most important topic in the last years, and for the time being in the RDA committees, not only in the RSC, but in the RDA board as well, is to make RDA as a standard as most international as it can be, and to make it applicable to worldwide user communities. This sounds easy, but it's really a challenge because the data all around the world should remain compatible. And a very important issue is, in addition, that all regulations, everything what we are doing must comply with our basic models, the ICP, the International Cataloging Principles, and the LLM. Another issue which is so important is that the technical framework conditions must be taken into account, and that, well, because it has to work and it has to happen then in practical cataloging, and that's why our technical team liaison officer is ex officio member in all of the working groups, and all the proposals coming into the RSC has to go through an assessment from the technical working group, because it's essential to know if it could happen in practical cataloging. Next slide, please. So you all know the 3R project was an important step to make the standard more international, but it was a starting point. Many things, many problems, many challenges could be solved in these years, but there are a lot of things we have to handle with for the time being and in the next time. And it's a real challenge. It sounds so easy to make a standard international, but that's really a challenge. And so you have to have an understanding that so many problems cannot be solved immediately, and that we have to do it step by step. Yes, next slide, please, to go ahead. Why are we on a good path for this international thing, and that we can make more and more progress in this? For the time being, we have more and more experience from worldwide user communities. We are getting, or we got in the last years, and we are getting for the time being, many feedback from all around the world, which shows us that there are many places in the toolkit, many regulations that had to be revised and that somebody has to have a look at this because they are not international in themselves or are not applicable for many or for some user communities. So we try to get and stay in contact with as many communities as we can all around the world. We are doing this with presentations, with publications, and as often as we can, we are doing outreach events in person or virtually to get as many feedback as we can. And one of a big part of this work are the working groups we heard about and the existing working groups you have for the time being for special topics. Because you can imagine members of the RAC, we have certain experts in the RAC, but we cannot solve all the problems for all topics that are existing. When we can go ahead to the next slide, please. So why did we start with the working groups, with the existing working groups, with those we are having for the time being? We just have selected the topics for special needs. We get many feedbacks, for example, for the extent topic. And so it was clear to have a working group for this. But we know very well that this only will be the beginning. Further topics will follow. We thought about working group for music, working group for archives. But as you know, or as you can imagine, perhaps we cannot have hundreds of topics at the same time, so we have to prioritize a bit. All the RAC working groups are set up as task and finish working groups, but if needed, and perhaps the overview you got this evening or this today shows you that there are many topics that couldn't be solved in a 2 years term, so there's no problem. So we can extend the tasks and the time for the task and finish working groups if the topic requires this. Along with this, the RAC discusses the work of the working groups at each of our meetings. We have quarterly meetings around the year, and we plan at each meeting we are discussing about the results or the ideas or the plans of the working groups and their further work. Next slide, please. What is essential for all working group, whatever topic is concerned? It is essential that the members came from different areas. This applies to expertise and cultural background. As you can imagine, when you saw today the work of the working groups, that they can only be efficient if people are coming from all around the world. Otherwise, we will never reach a true internationality. Next slide, please. So at last, I would give you just a short information that we just started with a new working group. This is not a task and finish working group. It's directly linked to the position of the RAC examples editor. It's an examples working group. As you can see, internationality also plays a big role here to having examples from all around the world, from different cultures, from different languages and scripts. And so we started this working group as a standing working group, and we hope that we can get members from all around the world with their ideas, their expertise to bring in examples for the standard RDA. Next slide, please. So please excuse me, but it's now we have some members here of the working group, and so I would like to say thank you on behalf of the whole of the RAC, from all members of the RAC, to thank you all, the colleagues, for their willingness to participate or even to lead one of the working groups, to come here today, even if it's so late in the evening for some of us, Hanoch, for example. So the work cannot be taken for granted, but it's extremely important. Then I thank you very much. And you have my contact information and every information. You saw the links in the presentations of my predecessors that are available on the RDA RSC website.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Renate, for the comprehensive introduction of the RIC working group work. Now we open for the Q&A, focusing on the RIC working groups part. Any questions being posted? I'm checking the Q&A. I haven't seen any questions. NARDAC folks, do you have any questions? Just curious, what's the most challenging part? I remember we received RSC working group proposals, and then for us, sometimes the turnaround time should be quite quickly that we receive, and then we need to distribute immediately, and then I think within 1 month or bit more, we need to compile our response to the working groups. What's usually the timeline of working groups working schedule? Like when you form it and then when you need to receive the response, does that need to align with the RSC meetings?
Yes, I can try to answer, Clara. Yes, that it's aligned with the RSC meetings. We need the responses a bit in advance, but I can understand the problem NARDAC had, but even all other communities are having from time to time. And please imagine those communities, think of those communities who have different languages where English is not their native language, so they have to translate it, or you need more time to read. It's always a problem to have a deadline which will fit for everybody.
Yeah.
But on the other side, the RSC decided in between the 3R project that the revise process should be a bit more faster, that it should not last endlessly or so long if a change can be made. So we have to think about a balance between being a bit more faster than we were perhaps some years ago in the revision process and the needs of the communities. I know there is no ideal time for deadlines, but we hope that it can fit a bit for all the communities.
Yeah, definitely. I think sometimes action is more important rather than leave things pending, because anyway, for many of the questions, there's really no perfect solution. I noticed there's a question when the official RDA will be available. I think it's already available now. It depends on different cataloging community when you implement the official RDA. Is my understanding correct, panel?
Yes, it is. The official RDA is available since some years in the new toolkit, but as you said, Clara, it depends perhaps for certain colleagues in their community, if their community is able or willing, or is it the right time for them to implement it and how to implement it. So I know worldwide, we are having many communities which are working with the original toolkit so far, because they have to work out plans how to implement the new toolkit. That's very different all around the world.
That's true. We have a great, brave cataloger stand up. Is about joining a working group as Middle East Iraqi Muslim catalogers. I don't know whether that cataloger is brave enough want to stand out as part of a working group member, or it's a question for the outreach question. How much effort RSC being reach out to Mideast catalogers?
For the time being, as far as I remember, we didn't have an outreach there in that region, but RSC is always happy to have contacts to come into a discussion with the colleagues there. Sometimes it depends, we need some institutions to have a contact, and that we can start with a discussion which can end at a certain time in an outreach event, maybe in person, maybe virtually. We know, everybody knows since the pandemic that we have this possibility, and we are able to have virtual outreach events so that many of the colleagues can attend. It's sometimes in some regions, it's for the colleagues, it's difficult to come to an in-person outreach event. So we have to have contact with certain institutions. May these be libraries, may these be library associations, that we can make plans about this.
Yes, at the same time, I hear it's a NARDAC forum. I don't know whether we have colleagues in the community who's willing to bridge, if you consider there's a gap or something, to bridge it or to contribute your own expertise in the working group. Leave a way to contact with you if possible. Sure. I assume you want to contact the RSC chair. On the screen, we have her contact information. Yes, you can, I believe, Renate, yes.
That's
She's
fine. Yeah.
welcome all the contacts.
And all the contact information is on the RSC's website as well.
Yes. Any other questions? If not, for now, let's move on to our next session. Again, here, I think some of our RSC working group representatives need to take a good rest because it's very late in their time zone. Thank you so much for everything you've done. And we definitely looking forward to working with you more in the future. Thank you so much. Okay, our next session is from home. She's from Library and Archives Canada, and then she will bring us a very interesting but challenging task that they are working on, the bilingual policy statements development. Go ahead, hand it over to you, Hong.
Okay, thank you, Clara. And thank you for having this opportunity to share LAC's RDA-PS development progress with the community after our 2020 updates. And I also like to provide special thanks to my colleague, our LAC-PS writer, Natalie Minwell. Next, please. As you know, English and French are the two official languages in Canada. Library and Archives Canada is obligated to provide equal access in both official languages. In cataloging, we create bibliographic and authority records in English, French, or in both languages, subject to the language of the publications and linguistic needs of the users. So to develop the policy statements, we need to access to the official RDA toolkit in both languages. So we are very happy to see the translated French RDA toolkit in the September RDA release, but there's still a gap between the English version versus the French version because the latter is based on the September 2022 version of the original English instructions and version 4.1.1 of the RDA reference data published on GitHub. We also need to develop two sets of policy statements, one in English and one in French. We expect both sets of the policy statements available in the English and French RDA toolkit. Next, please. When we prepare the policy statements in the original RDA toolkit, we worked in our in-house developed RLS to create and manage a bilingual authority file. There have been some environmental changes after our original RDA toolkit policy statements. LAC does not manage its own name authority file anymore. LAC joined NACO in December 2016. Since then, LAC contributes English name authority records to NAF. LAC also became a PFAN member in June 2020. PFAN is a Francophone Name Authority Program, a collaboration between LAC, Bibliothèque et Archives Nationales du Québec, BNQ, and 15 university libraries from the Bureau de Coopération Interuniversitaire, BCI. So LAC contributes to the Canadian file with other PFAN members when creating French name authority records. Next, please. Again, when we work in the original RDA PS, LAC developed the English PS and collaborated with BNQ in the French PS. And this time we will work on our own to develop both English and French PS. Next, please. In summary, as a bilingual national institution, LAC has to provide the same policy statements in both official languages. These policy statements have to reflect the LAC needs when describing content in Canadian context and specifically related to the bilingual requirements. As members of NACO and PFAN, LAC needs to align with the NACO and PFAN practice when applicable. And one important task for us is to make PCC practice available in both English and French PS. Next, please. LAC envisions that we will go through these stages to complete our PS development in the official RDA toolkit. We have been creating and revising policy statements starting from the English version in spreadsheets. We will then create a boilerplate text in English and translate into French using Trados. The next step is to create English PS in the CMS and finally translate LAC PS that are not boilerplate text into French. Except for the first step, we will test in CMS to confirm the feasibility of our plan. Next, please. So this is what we envision in the LAC PS, that in the English and French version, it will cover LAC practice, PCC practice, and PFAN practice. Next, please. So it's a challenge for us to include the PCC practice in the LAC PS in the CMS. For the translation need, we are considering copy-pasting PCC practice into the English PS and then translate with Trados in the French version. Again, this approach will be tested and it might change depending on the test result. Thank you. Next, please. PFAN aligns with PCC in certain degree. For PFAN practice, they will be available in boilerplate only. That is one boilerplate in French and one in English. We have not decided which one to be created first in CMS. Next, please. So unlike PCC practice, PFAN practice will be using CONREF, reference content, from the English or French PFAN boilerplate. Future updates will be done only in the PFAN boilerplate. Next, please. Because the PCC practice will be copied and pasted into our English PS and then translated into French, we need a structure to track PCC updates and stay up to date with the PCC practice. PFAN Standards Committee, including LEC, will work on the PFAN practice. In addition to the bilingual PS development, LEC will work on other bilingual documentation, including bilingual application profiles and training documents and MGD as well. Next, please. LEC plans to have the first policy statements live in the official RDA toolkit by the January 2024 release, starting with the manifestation elements. Because LEC's implementation schedule is influenced by the availability of French RDA toolkit, stabilization of the LC-PCC-PS translations, and the test in the CMS, we are expecting a rolling implementation of official RDA toolkit, probably in a year or so after LC's implementation. Next, please. Any questions? And here also you can reach me and our standards team for any RDA and standard related questions in this email. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hong, for give us this great update. Any questions? I haven't seen any new posted questions in the chat or Q&A. Just curious, I think for the PCC, if my understanding is correct, for the policy statements relating to PCC, you will use the English version and then do the translation part. For LAC policy statements and then PFAN, do you plan to, do you have two parallel version but not translation, or you will do the English version and then translation to the French version?
We will have the English version and then the French version, both version in the English RDA toolkit, and then also the English version and the French version in the French RDA toolkit. So that's kind of
okay,
two sets.
Yes, for the
each version. Yes, for the contents.
It.
Yes, and that has to be translated into French for
okay.
our.
For the so, if my understanding is correct, for the content-wise, the French version in most cases will be the translation rather than like there's some like a French version kind of different from the content-wise or the instruction-wise different from English version, but it is related to the same option. Would that exist, or most of the cases it will be more like translation, different language translation, instruction consistent with both versions?
I presumably that is right. I need to confirm with our policy writer, but I think that's depending on which one we start first. That could be English translated into French, like the PCC practice, or we start from French first. It might also be the case that for the PFAN practice.
Okay, I noticed early there's someone raised a hand. Laura, I don't know whether you can unmute yourself or post your question to the Q&A part for Hong to answer. Okay, I haven't seen any new questions. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to add to the Q&A part, and then Hong will definitely answer those questions. Any other questions from the panel members with regard to the bilingual policy statements development? Okay, if not, let's move on to our last session, the RDA, the NARDAC update. Okay, I will go through first a few slides quickly as they give brief background of NARDAC, including our current members and then the communities we represent and then the roles we have in NARDAC. No change since early this year. As we had the NARDAC updates in ALA annual conference, this update will mainly cover July through November. So we worked on RSC proposals, and for each proposal, a NARDAC member promptly sent out the distribution notice right after they're available, and the representatives actively reached out to the cataloging communities that they represent. And NARDAC's response to RSC proposals, even for the approved ones, often include comments and suggestions that represent the community's group opinions. Here, I'd like to thank all the community members that with your support, we can compile your thoughts and opinions and then send what you want or your opinions on those proposals to RSC. As Patrick earlier mentioned that for 2023 religions working groups, the first proposal, NARDAC is the only group that did not support the proposal. We, regardless members' personal opinion, we purely based our thoughts, our responses based on the community's feedback. So that's how it's working out. Eventually, this PowerPoint will be posted in the NARDAC website. All links available to the communities to double check if you are interested in seeing all the details of our response. 4 NARDAC members are involved in PCC RDA introductory training. At this point, we are finalizing 17 training modules, and they will be posted at the LC's Catalogers Learning Workshop website for free by the end of the year. Live webinars and then Q&A will be available early next year. Stay tuned for the announcements from PCC. I'd also like to let folks know here, those are the trained trainer modules, which means on the base of give recognition to PCC, SCT, RDA training working group, catalogers can feel free to take the contents from these training series and do the cataloging trainings themselves if they'd like. Bob Maxwell, as our NARDAC RSC representative, attended a full RSC meeting in Vienna in this October. Here are some updates of the meeting. On October 16, there is an outreach event. All presentations have been posted in PDF at RSC's website. The next day is a public session, and 2 proposals have been approved with minor changes. And the meeting also discussed the soft deprecated terms. And rest of the meeting focused on various reports. There's also a discussion about RSC's role in developing application profiles, which is considered as essential elements relating to RDA's implementation by many cataloging communities. For the coming 2024, please note RSC will have online public meetings in January, April, and July. stay tuned for the meeting announcements if you'd like to hear or join the discussion. So what's coming next? For NARDAC, we plan to have our spring update forum in April. By then, we hope we can bring some updates relating to the result analysis of PCC RDA test and some information about the RDA implementation. And NARDAC is also considering working with the RDA board to organize an ALA pre-conference event. So stay tuned for future announcement. So that's all for the NARDAC updates. Now we are open for the questions. Do you have any questions for NARDAC or for any topics at this update forum? If you have any proposals or suggestions about the future NARDAC updates forum topics, feel free to let us know. I noticed Helen raise your hand. Helen, oh, I can allow you to talk. Let me see. I send a question.
She can't talk. She'll have to.
Oh, okay.
Oh, is your mic open? Helen, can you speak?
Helen, I think I allowed you to unmute yourself.
Otherwise, she can just type into the Q&A area.
Yeah, if you cannot unmute them, please add your question to the Q&A. Any other questions? Okay, we received a new Q&A. Sorry, no question. I hit the wrong key. That's fine. That's fine. NARDAC, we brainstormed lots of kind of interesting topic in the future. Some relate to RDA, some even beyond. I don't know how community feel about AI and cataloging and linked data and RDA. This is one topic that NARDAC we discussed about it. So kind of curious about the technology and also the data structure and how far we can achieve streamline the process and then let AI help us with regard to the good quality metadata creation. That's also one topic in our mind that we want to explore. I don't know about community thoughts. Any other topics you'd like to know or discuss? Thank you, Anna. Thanks for joining us. Would you consider taking BibFrame and its relationship to RDA as a topic? Definitely. Some of us at least discussed about it. Melanie, are you there? You want to? I don't know whether you have any.
I am here.
The BibFrame and RDA and their relationship. What do you think?
So as a topic, we could certainly do perhaps a presentation on BibFrame in relationship to RDA, but it's not a direct relationship. It's more of a mapping exercise, and that is a wider topic that I do know that some of the RSC members have been looking into. I believe the technical working group is actually trying to address it.
Yes, the both data structure, I would say, or data modeling, both, especially for the official RDA, is very linked data friendly. And we definitely want to explore further in this topic. And as at LC, we kind of, with the very large possibility with the new system, we're moving toward a more production level of BibFrame metadata creation. This is the topic that we definitely gonna explore more and want to get more input from also the community. With regard to that question, do we have? I can help with this topic. Who are you? Leave your name. Definitely, we love to get the help from the community. The more, the better. Any other questions? Okay, let's see. I haven't got any other question. Okay. Okay, do you mind leave your contact information, or Melanie, can you post our NARDAC my email or your email? Let me actually answer. Actually, I can. Okay. Definitely contact me so that we can definitely communicate further with regard to your help or your interest. Thank you. And other folks, if you have any questions with regard to today's session or want contact information with some representative, you can contact NARDAC, and then we will forward your questions. And we do hope to get more information from you. And also, I would say, as NARDAC chair, I'm not that often checking my NARDAC email account. So if you have any NARDAC related questions, you can also contact my work email, and I will pass on your questions or your requests or your suggestions to RIC or other NARDAC members. Okay, it has been a while. I did not see any new questions popping up. Jamie, shall we adjourn this meeting? I think it's kind of late afternoon for some of the East Coast participants.
Yeah, that sounds like
Okay.
a good idea. I think it was an excellent meeting.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
all.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye.